Two ball fields. Yeah, Jason says we put lights there.
Well, that's something as long as the lights out there are going to disturb a lot of people. So that's something we could put into that. And obviously, it's probably going to be.
Dr. Wayne, can you just wait a minute so I can
No, it's me.
pull this up? Also doesn't have all the- Go ahead, you can start.
Are you sure? Jeannie, you ready?
You go ahead.
It would be nice for everybody to see it. If you need a little more time to find it.
Yeah, it's really slow.
Are you wired or not?
No. Well, I'll tell you, my wired is horrible in my office. It knocks me on and off, so I don't.
Should be that last.
Okay, go ahead. Let me get back to this.
All right, I'm going to call the July 19th Public Service Committee meeting to order. Better practice what I preach. If you have a cell phone, please turn it on to your vibrate. All right, first item, please.
Number 9, ordinance third reading, amending section 2.40.020, appointment of judges, powers generally of chapter 2.40, municipal court of title 2, administration and personnel of the code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Your staff report. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Stephanie Boster, Cheyenne City Attorney. What you have before you on third reading is an ordinance amending the city ordinance related to the powers of judges in general. And the intention here was to follow state statute and to give the municipal court judges more tools in the toolbox to assess fines and fees. However, council had a lot of really good questions last week or 2 weeks ago at Public Services Committee. So the city attorney's office has put together a legal memorandum addressing some of those issues. And we also have a proposed substitute ordinance, which addresses a lot of the issues that council brought before us 2 weeks ago. And I'm available for questions.
Councilman, committee members, any questions?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Seager.
Director, could you just kind of go through just generally your legal opinion and kind of just give us an update on what you found and the reason for the substitute? I mean,
Absolutely.
kind of brief us a little bit on that.
Well, and I think the bulk of the heavy lifting was done by the city attorney's legal intern, Matt Gradecki. So I think I'll bring him up here and see if he can't outline for council
Wonderful.
changes to ordinance and some of the research he did.
Matthew Gradecki, legal intern with the city attorney's office.
Thank you.
What you have before you is a legal memorandum going over some of the questions that were presented last time by the council. As you can see there in the conclusion, on the first, second, and briefly on the third page, is it goes over the 3 authorized fees under Wyoming statute 56108. The first fee and or cost is the $10 court cost in trials. What we found going over that is that really that can only be assessed as part of a trial and not the arraignments that make up the bulk of the municipal court. The second fee is a $40 court automation fee. And this fee is to be paid by every person guilty of a violation of a city or town ordinance. That fee can be assessed after an arraignment if somebody is found guilty of a city ordinance.
how about if they just pay the fine without having a judgment?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, through you,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Secret. Could you repeat the question, sir?
Through you, sir. If I come in and I just pay the fine, am I automatically, do you automatically add the $40 on? Or do I have to actually go to trial
To be found guilty.
and be found guilty?
So through you, Chair, to Councilman Seagraves. The $40 automation fee, as well as the $10 indigent civil legal services fee that we'll go into later, can be assessed anytime somebody appears in court and is found guilty, and that would be at an arraignment if they plead guilty or enter a plea of nolo contendere or no contest, as well as upon the conclusion of a trial for those last two fees as well.
I have a follow-up.
Sure.
So the only instance, most people in municipal court, lots of times it's parking tickets, traffic violations. Whereas Councilman Seagrave said, you just say, yeah, I was speeding, I'm gonna sign it off, send the money in. That obviously isn't a trial, so I guess the question is the fee collected in that instance, or is it not? Or is it actually like major misdemeanors or felonies where we actually go to trial with the fee is collected?
Chair, the first fee, the $10 first fee would be in only the cases of trial.
Okay.
The $40 court automation fee and the $10 civil legal services indigency fee would be if they actually show in court at that initial arraignment. If they choose to just post the bond and forfeit the bond, they wouldn't be showing in court. So none of these fees would be assessed in that case.
So then, can either of you give an example? Because obviously traffic violations really, unless you want to challenge the ticket, you don't go to court for that. So what are some examples of where this fee would require an arraignment need and would be assessed then?
I think a good example is probably those higher level offenses like a DUI or a driving under suspension. That's the must appear tickets, both of those are. So the individual would show up at the arraignment and either plead guilty or not guilty.
Correct.
And at the disposition, the sentencing, those fees could be assessed by the municipal court judges.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr.
So
Seagrave.
if I have a traffic violation and I don't feel like I was speeding and I show up and I'm convicted, it's gonna cost me an extra $50 rather than just taking the fine and walking out.
That's correct.
Through the chair, Councilman Seagrave, it would actually be, in that case, if you did plead not guilty, and after a bench trial or jury trial were found guilty, you would be assessed you could be assessed the $10 court costs, the $40 court automation fee, and the $10 civil legal services fee. Before you in the substitution, I believe it's subsection D. I'm sorry, subsection E does address cases where could not pay those fees and fines.
Right.
And it addresses those cases where it would give the municipal judges the ability to continue with their ethical obligation to make sure that we're not overburdening.
So you're risking $60 if you come in and fight the ticket,
At least.
at least. Okay, I get it.
Mr. Lebron, go ahead. So in section E, the ability to waive the court fee doesn't conflict with state statute. It says we're supposed to assess these fees.
And Chair, no, we believe that subsection E does not conflict with state statute. The state statute under our reading is a fee to be paid by every person guilty of a violation of city or town ordinance. That means that the municipal judge would be required to assess these latter two fees, court automation and indigent civil legal services fees. Under subsection D, it is a shall, they shall assess these. And then subsection E says that they can make a finding of inability to pay or a undue burden and waive the imposition of those.
And I understand that, but does the state statute give the judge that latitude, or is it shall be assessed in state statute?
The way the state statute reads, Chair, is that cities and towns may enact an ordinance.
Okay.
And then imposing these fees to be paid by every person guilty of a violation of city ordinances, and we believe that that leaves them for this subsection. E.
And Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, if I could add on, we had to do a little bit of legal gymnastics to get there. I think you can tell. The concern of the municipal court judges is there's case law which would prohibit us from, or prohibit them rather from assessing fees against somebody who couldn't pay them. It would be debtor's prison essentially.
Okay.
So we wanted to give them a way out. But state statute is essentially subsection D. We added E for that purpose.
All right, thank you.
And I could defend it legally, but there is some gymnastics here.
Okay. And I wanted to thank you for, in D2, for the better explanation of the indigent fee. I think I understood it last time, but the way I read it, it didn't look good.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from the committee?
Just one final one,
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair,
Secretary.
to either one of you. I think you just answered it, but the municipal judges have had a chance to review this and they're not opposed to it.
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, through you to Councilman Seagrave, they're not opposed to it. They are concerned that because state statute says shall assess a fee to every person, that it's mandatory. So we tried to help them out with E, but there could be circumstances where they would feel that this would be inappropriate. So the other thing I would mention, as you notice, we can't keep all of the court automation fee. We can keep $10 of the 40. So there might be a disincentive there for them to assess fees.
Chairman,
Mr. Labor.
so how does the court do means testing of individuals as to whether they can pay the fee or not?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Councilman Laybourne, during a sentencing, the judge, after an individual pleads guilty, the judge will ask them those questions. And typically the way I've seen it happen in circuit court is the court will assess the fees, then they'll make a finding of an inability to pay those fees by the defendant and they'll waive them. So that's why we've got a mention of waiver in the title of the ordinance. That gives the judges the ability to assess the fee and then waive them under E. And typically that finding is more of a conversation, like the defendant telling the judge, there's no way I can pay this. I don't have a job. You know, I barely have a car, that kind of thing. But it's a case by case discussion between the judge and the defendant on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, Mr. Seagrave, any
I'm
other
good.
questions?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate all your hard work. Thank you both.
So we need Jennifer, any public comment. Have a motion,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
I would move to approve the new ordinance. Adopt.
It's approved.
Approve.
Second,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
I would move to substitute dated July 19th, 2022.
second,
Okay, there's been a motion to amend by substitute. Any discussion from the committee? All those in favor of the substitute signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, all those in favor, any discussion then on the main motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion is, the recommendation rather will be to amend by substitute and then to approve.
Number 11, ordinance second reading, amending various sections of chapter 13.12 sewer system of title 13 public services of the municipal code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming to allow for exceptions to sewage disposal requirements.
Staff report, please. Mr. Bloom.
Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director. This actually is a follow-up to an ordinance that was drafted by the Board of Public Utilities and approved by the governing body on February 28th of 2022. At that time, there were some revisions to Title 13 regarding septic systems that we did not include. If they were included at that time, it would have triggered a re-review by the EPA for all the regulations that had changed. So this was promised as a follow-up. We have proposed two amendments that will essentially accomplish two things. Number one, it will allow for the annexation of properties that may be on septic systems, with the governing body simply allowing for an exception. For example, we have the past case of Mustang Ridge where an exception was granted. However, there was truly no clear guidance in the municipal code as to how an exception could be granted. So what this does is in section 13.12.020, it allows for specific circumstances that at the time of annexation, the city could grant an exception, say, you do not need to connect at this time. The second item is it allows for the replacement of a failed septic system in the city limits in the event they meet specific criteria. And those criteria are the ones outlined in the 201 IGA, which is an intergovernmental agreement between the city, the county, and the Cheyenne Water and Sewer District that says you can only replace a septic system if it meets several criteria. In the staff memo, I have outlined the 4 criteria of the 201 IGA. Number one of the criteria is, does it conform to the policies for city annexation? If that exception were granted, is it not detrimental to public health, safety, and welfare? Is there a hardship or a fiscal hardship to require that sewer connection? And does an exception comply with the goals and the vision of the sewer facilities plan? So essentially, long story short, what that means is if you have an isolated parcel that is a significant distance from a sewer main, and it is an unreasonable cost to extend that sewer main, an exception could be granted to allow for replacement of a septic system. I'm open for any questions that you may have regarding this item.
Mr. Seager.
Mr. Chair, through you. We are considering some annexations, and they're going to vary in size from a small municipal lot to several acres. I would think that these exceptions would not apply to a small municipal lot. I have a block I'm thinking about right now, and quite frankly, the well is in the backyard and the septic's in the front yard, and the two seem to meet each other. I can't imagine us approving that. Is that something that could possibly apply to this?
Mr. Boone?
Chair and Councilman Seagrave, this could apply in those situations, and each one will be able to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis with that annexation. For example, if there's a small lot where there's a sewer line that is readily available, at that point, the city could require that a sewer connection be put in place. But if there is a small lot, maybe there is a sewer line in existence, maybe that the septic system is new and it still complies, it's not flagged as a hazard by city county health, it could continue to operate until such point that would have to be abated or connect the city sewer system. But short answer is it would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And in regard to the city initiated annexation actions that we're proposing in the upcoming year or so, the intention here is to annex those properties as is, unless there is a major public safety or health issue that is visible on that property.
So if someone's septic needs to be replaced, theoretically, they could replace it if there's not contaminants and, visible, I think is the word you used. Would we test for that, or how would we go about that to determine whether that would be approved?
Chair, through to Councilman Seagrave. Who we would work with would be the city county health department. They have specific criteria for where septic systems are located, and they have the authority from the state DEQ as to regulating where the placement is and how close it is to a well. There are some cases that replacement of a septic system just isn't allowed, and they would be mandated to connect to the city sewer system. And that would be a requirement regardless of them being in the city or not, because the sewer, the facilities plan service area for sewer. It encompasses the sewer bowl boundary outside of the city limits.
So the city, through City County Health is gonna be our expert on this.
Chair.
Pretty much.
Through the,
Yes.
through the, yeah, that is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Laborn? Any questions?
Well, I think
This
I
puzzle look, I
better
think you
visit
might
with Mr. Bloom about this in the interim. I think there are a lot of interesting questions here. Mustang Ridge, been there a while. And how we determine what is unreasonable in terms of
Sure.
the distance, and certainly those annexations are, I support, but having dealt with the 201 agreement in the past, it is, I look forward to visiting with you, Mr. Bloom, because I'd like to get to specific cases where we could look at different areas and different experiences, figure that out. Thank you.
I have a question in the 13.12.040, the first sentence. It says all outhouses, septic tanks, cesspools. Our discussion so far has been in regard to septic tanks, and cesspools I would take our lagoons also. We are really not going to grant exceptions for outhouses and lagoons, are we?
Chair, through to the members of the committee. No, I would not imagine that we would grant those exceptions. The,
May I interrupt?
yeah,
Then I presume this is old language, and could we?
correct. This,
Okay.
this is the language that has existed in the code that had not been modified. When we initially worked with the Board of Public Utilities at the beginning of 2022, we looked at, well, what would be the minimum language necessary to accomplish the purpose to allow septic systems to continue in certain scenarios. So we didn't touch the items such as septic tank or cesspools and outhouses and other means of sewage disposal. What I can do is I can work with Roy Kroger and Brad Brooks, and we can look at a way to narrow that down specifically for
Well,
septic systems
If we
only.
don't do it today, I may try to amend that out of there on Monday. So.
And Chair, just to let you know, we do, this is a second reading, so we will have one more committee meeting and we can prepare that.
Any other questions for Mr. Bloom? Thank you. Any public comment? Either in the room or online?
Let's see hands raised.
Okay. May I have a motion?
Move to adopt.
Second. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I never thought we'd see this day, but with, I realize if we try to do these annexations, we're gonna have to make some exceptions, so. It's just part of what we have to do to make that happen.
You know, you and I have never been fans of the 201 agreement. All right. Mr. Laborn, any discussion?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The recommendation for Monday will be to approve.
Number 13, resolution acknowledging receipt of the East Cheyenne Community Park Master Plan Report and appendices.
Staff report, please. This is better.
Are you gonna do it, Charles? Okay, thanks.
Chair, through you, members of the committee, just wanted to take this time to introduce you to the final version of our East Cheyenne Community Park Master Plan, which just recently became the Kiwanis Community Park Master Plan. I have Mr. John Beggs here. He's an associate principal with Russell Mills Studios. I think he did some really great work. And we'd like to just take a few minutes and kind of summarize the information in the report. And then if you have any questions, please let us know. John, if you wouldn't mind.
Council, John Begg, Russell Mill Studios. I was just gonna run through the report and kind of the process and how we got to where we are. first and foremost, we take into account where the project is, what's there, and we want to be considerate of its surroundings and what's been done in the past. So the goals and objectives for this report were to provide a roadmap for the future, assess recreational needs, analyze infrastructure, and then identify buildable areas. And then I think one of the most important parts of this park are the regional drainage and how it's affected and how it's going to be corrected in this area. So the process that we take great pride in that process. We want to make sure that we're involving the community throughout the entire process. So several opportunities to do online surveys, public outreaches, open houses. And then as we move through the process, those concept designs and whatever is produced through the process is then shown to the community. The community has the opportunity to respond to that and to give any comments. We look at program and amenities. I won't go through the list, but there's quite a few parts and pieces in the park. We're asking a lot of this space, but I feel like the plan responds to the land and what's there, and trying to keep and preserve a lot of pieces that are already existing. So we go through site analysis. This looks at existing conditions, buildable areas, floodplains, floodways, adjacent neighborhoods, connections, both from pedestrian and vehicular. And those are all taken into account as we move through concept design. Opportunities and constraints. Again, this goes into a lot of the constraints are the floodway and floodplain. So a lot of where the buildable area is on the north portion of the park. That was done previously. Floodplain analysis, there's a lot of information here. We have a very thorough analysis of what's been done, what needs to happen, and then how the park will affect anything in the future. And then as we move through that process, 2 concept designs were developed. So those are the concept 1 and 2. We had a stakeholder meeting, and then the public had opportunity to comment on both of those concepts. And then whatever came out of that meeting and any kind of public comment was then revised into the final concept, essentially the revised alternative concept number 2. Which then was finalized into the overall master plan. So the overall master plan, when you look at it, you can kind of see where a large portion of the buildable area up north, that's where a lot of the buildings and more permanent parts and pieces of the park are. And then as you move further south, and specifically on the south side, that constructed wetland that's there, we're not going to be doing anything to that essentially. We might be doing some trail improvements in and around it, but for the most part, we want to keep that in place. These are just enlargements of those areas. So from the northwest moving south, there's skate park, basketball courts in the northwest corner. The 2 large buildings that are labeled number 9 would be the gymnasium and indoor court buildings that have been kind of identified as a need for the community. Number 10 would be similar to the Kiwanis building, Kiwanis community building, similar size. In between that and the pool area would be a large community playground space. And then next to that obviously is the community pool. North of that area is pickleball courts and then tennis courts. And then you can see the 2 ball fields on the northeast corner there. And then on the right side, between the match line, there's a large open kind of flexible lawn space, and that space can accommodate three soccer fields essentially. So it's a substantially large space. parking south of that, and then everything on the south side. We did some amending of those trails and kind of some additional trail connections, but for the most part, everything that's there is going to remain. I think the city and the community's done a beautiful job down there, and we don't want to do anything to affect that. These are just illustrative 3D views of these spaces. So you can see the pool area in there and the multi-purpose field. This is looking from Pershing and Whitney, looking southwest. And then these just go into some more enlargement plans. So the ball field area will have restroom facilities and concessions. Each kind of area in itself will have can live independently almost, so that it'll have its own restroom and concession space. Some more 3D views, the tennis courts there in the foreground and the pickleball courts, ball fields behind that. And then the skate park and basketball area. And then moving further south. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is the Dry Creek area and just wanting to, I think we identified that as looking at improvements through this area and then doing some sort of nature play or playground area next to it. I think it's a neat opportunity. 3D view of that, and then you can see the nature play and improved creek area. And then the pool area, playground. So the pool, it's a large pool area that served the community very well. And then the playground, a large space there as well. And the multi-purpose field, again, you can see the faint outline of those three fields there. And then a 3D view of that. And then we start to look at visual preferencing examples of site furnishings. We just kind of give a nod to that. Again, as the plan and as the park would evolve, those things would be determined in the future. And then again, the report goes into, infrastructure and what needs to happen as far as utilities for the area. This was done by AVI here in Cheyenne and Civil Works. And then we get into phasing, and there's been discussion around phases and the way that the phases are going to be structured. I think there's a lot of discussion that could go into how phase one, what is phase one and what's phase 11 essentially. So a lot of these things can be moved around as funding comes. And then we also wanted to just give something as far as what could be done for donors. If somebody wants to come along and put their name on a shade shelter, they could. And then we did a thorough cost analysis and cost estimate for the park. We've been doing a lot of this cost estimating. It's been very, very tricky given the times, but we've done this across the country a lot in Wyoming specifically. So, and we use a online cost estimating tool to know and find out the most current costs. And then I can take any questions.
Some questions at this point,
Just briefly,
Mr. Seagrave.
maybe a comment and a question.
Yeah.
I love the plan. I think it's great. I think it's going to be a beautiful park. We have a very active botanic garden and a large group of volunteers. I don't see anything in the park that includes them. Is there first of all a need for that for an east side expansion or?
Chair, through you.
Go ahead.
One thing that we do have going on currently is that we're getting ready to contract with Russell Mills again to do sort of an open space plan. We have some opportunity for some grant funding next spring, but we need a plan to work with so that we can get that grant funding. So they will be looking at improved gravel trails out there, probably some educational signage around the pond describing water quality issues or native plantings, things like that. And I'm already working with the Kiwanis group, specifically Phil Van Horn, on some volunteer efforts that they'd like to do at this point, some fall planting and some additional seeding for the native areas and that kind of thing. So we're definitely reaching out in terms of volunteer efforts. I've got a lot of interest by the Audubon Society in this project. They're going to start working on, will include some bird blinds, which they're Audubon's very interested in. They've already donated $2,500 towards that effort. There's a lot of interest in volunteering. So we need to get an implementation plan together so we can begin to do some of this. Maybe we can include like the natural play area, things like that. The big dollar amounts are going to happen when we start building ball fields and things like that. But you know, this plan is going to be great for kind of making everything connect. We want, you know, we're going to have to take it out, take it on in bite-sized pieces, and then it'll all look great when we're done over the years. So,
Mr. Seeger, to address your question more specifically, is the council's rep to the Botanic Gardens Board, their focus is really shifting more towards the Arboretum to the west of town. So they were happy to see that the parks was adopted by the voters, and
But they're not interested in having a
There's not-
facility at
there's
all in the park.
no, like I said, their focus now is what do we do with the Arboretum and how do we start using it now?
Okay, thank you. Again, once again, if we can build it, it's gonna be great, you know, it's just, hope I live long enough to to see some.
Mr. Laborn, any questions?
No.
John, you said at some point you were going to address the drainage issues. That was one of the highlights of using this piece of property, acquiring this piece of property for the park as opposed to the previous administration was not a real fan of this piece of property. And yet, are there any, you said you weren't going to touch the natural area. And yet part of the issue with the water coming down through that floodplain and then bumping up against the EP tracks is that we're now requiring 50% more retention upstream of there because we don't want to cause damage to the EP embankment. So did we not look at any engineering, getting any engineering value out of that to try and reduce the retention upstream?
Chair, through you, if I could try and answer that question. We have another project that we're working on with the MPO in terms of that old drainage structure under the railroad there, and placing the possibility of placing some additional culverts under the embankment so that we could literally move some of the water. I can't answer, Tom Cobb's here and he might be able to answer a little more. We can't move a lot of water is my understanding from here to there, only because then we cause future problems
Okay.
for other areas. I think there probably is a reasonable balance in doing that. I know that the conservation district's side, the south side of the embankment, they wouldn't mind taking on a little bit more water. So this has definitely been conversations. There's a lot of stuff going on with this park that's
Right.
could potentially kind of solve some problems, I
Thank you,
think.
Mrs. Vetter.
Tom, did you?
City Engineer Cobb, is here to contribute to the discussion.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, through you, I guess, to the committee. So two components to this which are not mentioned. We have the Dry Creek Master Plan, which is currently underway, that's looking at this entire area. So the second component is I have a design project that we got a FEMA grant for to actually physically implement what we're talking about here with perhaps constructing a separate berm, adding a separate conveyance element under the railroad tracks itself and that negotiation. So those two components are in place, and hopefully what comes out of this is we don't have the 20-year requirement in the future. That is my hope, they were able to up that to a 50-year discharge rate and allow more development to occur upstream. So that ultimately is where we're trying to go. But again, two important pieces to this. Dry Creek Master Plan, which is looking at holistically at the entire basin. And then specifically, we have a project that you'll see coming your way that is dealing directly with the design of those elements adjacent to the park.
Okay, and Mr. Cobb, if I may, when do you anticipate the Dry Creek Master Plan will be completed?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if approximately we are 8 months of this time, August, it'll be August of next year. Sorry,
Okay,
about
well,
a year away.
It'll still be before we're in a financial position to do anything here. I just didn't want to, like, we do a street and then BP tears it up 6 months later.
Yeah.
So,
And Chair, if I could add, I'm trying really making a big effort to make sure that we're not going to go in there and do anything that we'd have to tear out in the long run. But the Kiwanis is very interested in planting a few trees and that kind of thing. So,
well, the natural area is beautiful. I was involved early on in the acquisition or arguing for this park. And I remember Mr. Kaiser, the owner, had taken then Councilman Luna and I out there to look at it. And it was in the spring, there were swans on the
it's
lake.
beautiful.
I mean, it was just something you don't normally
Mhm.
see. Or actually, pardon me, it wasn't swans, it was pelicans. It's something you don't normally see in
Yeah.
Cheyenne.
If
So
I could,
I don't want
yeah.
to damage that, but I also want to make sure that we take care of some of the drainage concerns that we have upstream from that.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Laybourne.
so I was wondering if Mr. Bloom could tell us the status of the acquisition of the area immediately to the east of the park that connects to the 1903 tunnel that goes under and to the
Chair, through you.
Mrs. Vitter?
Councilman Layboard, we're currently working on that. We're working with, they signed up with a realtor. I'm working through her. We've got an appraisal on the property. And so we've got our next step is to get an environmental assessment with our EPA grant that we have. So it's looking very good.
I mean, existing EPA brownfield grant? Or
Isn't that what it's
Mr. Bloom?
called? I apologize if I.
That's right. Chair, through you to members of the committee, we have a different regional grant through the EPA that we can utilize through the Denver office for phase 1 and phase 2 environmentals. We can utilize them as well as other property owners in the community. So we're coordinating that effort with them right now. The recent grant we had is specific to the west end and specific properties. So this is a different grant.
thank you.
My last question. Obviously, I think we think this is a beautiful plan. We're going to acknowledge receipt. What's next? Working on funding?
Yeah, Chair, through you, I think that the next thing you'll see from me is I'm working on a professional services agreement with Russell Mills to work on these natural areas, signage, things like that, so that we can go out and get some grant funding next spring.
Okay, and that's somewhat the low hanging fruit because we don't have to do a whole lot with that.
Correct. And then, I don't know, just thoughts that have run through my mind is that we take a particular phase, maybe it's those ball fields, and we ask for request a portion of it for 6 penny. I don't know, we'll have to have discussions on that. I don't know, it's an expensive park.
It is. All right, thank you. If there are no further questions, then any public comments either from the room or online? Public comment?
I don't see any hands raised.
Gentlemen, we need to acknowledge receipt of the report.
So moved.
Second,
Discussion,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Laybourne.
having followed this for many years, it's quite a moment to actually have a plan in front of us for property that's acquired and all that went into it in terms of the drainage and all that's going to continue. This is kind of the thing that I think is really, really exciting to be approving it. Or accepting receipt, I guess is what we're doing, but this is a big moment. Glad I'm here to vote yes.
All right, thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of acknowledging receipt signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the recommendation for Monday will be to acknowledge receipt of the report. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
That
It's beautiful.
concludes our business. We are adjourned.